Ethan had never been on this planet before, but he'd heard stories. The alien world was beautiful, lush forests, tall mountains, and crystal-clear oceans. It was also full of mysteries. As part of the human peacekeeping mission, Ethan's job was to make sure everything stayed peaceful between the different alien races. But he wasn't sure how long he'd be able to keep the peace with her around Lyra, the alien beauty queen. He had heard of her, seen her face on posters around the city. She was known for her beauty, her intelligence, and her pride. Ethan had heard many things, but he didn't expect to meet her so soon. It happened in the marketplace. The city was crowded with aliens from different species, and the air was full of strange smells and loud voices. Ethan had been looking for some supplies when he spotted her. She stood in the center of the crowd, surrounded by her guards, her eyes sharp and calculating. She was tall, her skin a soft shade of blue, and her hair long and silver-shined in the sunlight. Ethan couldn't help but stare. She was even more stunning in person than he had imagined. Without thinking, he walked up to her. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, especially when it came to someone who was known to be untouchable. Ethan wasn't even sure what made him say it, but as he approached her, he grinned and said, "Hey, beauty queen, you're even more stunning up close." Lyra didn't flinch. She didn't even smile. Instead, she turned her sharp gaze on him and raised an eyebrow. "Watch your mouth, human," she said, her voice cold but not without power. "You might want to remember your place." Ethan was surprised by how quickly she snapped back. He had expected her to at least laugh or offer some playful reply. But there was nothing funny in her eyes. She meant what she said. Ethan's grin faded a little, but he wasn't one to back down. "I'm sorry if I offended you," he said with a shrug. "I just didn't expect the most beautiful woman in the galaxy to be so serious. My mistake." Lyra didn't respond at first. Instead, she studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. The air around them seemed to grow tense, and the people nearby slowly began to take notice of their exchange. "You're far too bold for your own good," she finally said, her tone still sharp but with a slight edge of amusement. Ethan laughed, brushing a hand through his short brown hair. "I guess that's one way to put it. I don't usually meet people who take themselves so seriously." Lyra tilted her head, not quite understanding what he meant. "And what exactly are you implying?" "Human." Her voice was low now, a warning in her tone. Ethan held up his hands in defense. "Nothing bad, I promise. Just trying to lighten the mood." But Lyra wasn't buying it. "I suggest you try harder," she replied, her voice a little softer now, but no less serious. "You may be a guest here, but that doesn't mean you can get away with disrespect, especially not from someone like me." Ethan raised his hands. "In mock surrender." "Fair enough," he said, trying to keep the mood light. "I'll keep the jokes to myself. But you've got to admit, you've got everyone's attention." Lyra's lips curled into a small smirk, but it quickly disappeared. "I don't need attention. I'm not like you." Ethan blinked. "Not like me? I'm just a soldier here to help." "You're the one with the fame and glory, right? You're a queen among your people." She looked away from him, a faint flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "My title means nothing here. You think because I'm known, it makes me untouchable? I'm still just another person." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. He'd heard the stories Lyra was no ordinary person. She had worked hard to get where she was, to be respected, even feared. But hearing her speak like this made him wonder if the fame and the title were just that, a title. Nothing more. He decided to change the subject. "All right, well, I'll leave you to it," he said. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Lyra looked at him for a long moment before turning to walk away, her guards following closely behind. But just as she was about to disappear into the crowd, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Next time, human, you might want to remember what I said." Ethan watched her go, feeling a strange mix of admiration and frustration. He had expected her to be just another alien with a pretty face, but there was something about her. Something that made him want to know more. He couldn't put his finger on it, but Lyra wasn't like the others. And for the first time since arriving on the planet, he felt like he had just met someone who could match him. Someone who might just be more than he could handle, as he turned to head back to the peacekeeping headquarters. Couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time he would cross paths with the beautiful, proud alien queen. The next few days passed in a blur for Ethan. His duties with the peacekeeping mission kept him busy. But there was something about his encounter with Lyra that stayed on his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her sharp words, the way she had looked at him with those piercing eyes. She had left an impression on him. He wasn't sure if it was a good one or a bad one. The marketplace where they had first met was still full of life. Ethan found himself wandering there again, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. He didn't have time for distractions, especially not one like Lyra. She was a beauty queen, someone beyond his reach, someone who could crush him with just a word if she wanted to. But as he walked through the crowded streets, he couldn't help but search for her. The air smelled of fresh fruits and strange spices, and the sounds of laughter and bargaining filled the space. People moved quickly, all going about their business, yet Ethan's eyes kept flicking back to every tall figure, every flash of silver hair, hoping to see her again then. He saw her. Lyra was standing by a stall, talking to a group of aliens. Her long silver hair shimmered in the sun, and her blue skin stood out against the duller colors of the crowd. She looked as regal as ever, her posture straight and confident. But today, there was something different about her. She wasn't surrounded by her usual guards, and there was a hint of exhaustion on her face. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then walked toward her. This time, he didn't have a joke ready. He wasn't sure if he could risk teasing her again after their first meeting. Instead, he took a deep breath and simply said, "Hey, Lyra." She turned quickly, her expression unreadable. For a second, Ethan thought she might turn and walk away without saying a word. But then she paused, as if weighing whether to engage. "With him or not, human," she said, with a slight nod, her voice cool. "I didn't expect to see you here again." Ethan smiled, trying to keep things light. "Well, I'm just looking for some supplies. This place has everything, doesn't it?" Lyra glanced around at the bustling market, then back at him. "Yes, it's one of the largest in the galaxy. Humans don't seem to appreciate the variety here." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How would you know what we appreciate?" She didn't answer right away, instead turning her gaze back to the crowd. It was strange. Ethan was used to seeing her surrounded by admirers and followers. But today, she seemed distant, almost lonely. "Why are you here, really?" Lyra finally asked, turning her attention back to Ethan. "What do you want from me?" Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. Was she asking because she was genuinely curious, or was she simply trying to get him out of her way? He didn't want to overstep, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something more to Lyra than the image she projected. "I don't want anything from you," he said, taking a step closer. "I just wanted to talk. We didn't exactly get off on the best foot last time." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "You think you can just walk up to me and expect me to forget what happened before?" Ethan shrugged. We're both here now, so why not make the best of it?" Lyra seemed to consider this for a moment, then sighed. "Fine, but just know, I don't waste time on people who don't understand what it means to be in my position." Ethan nodded, understanding what she meant. She wasn't just a queen or a beauty. She had responsibilities. People depended on her. He wasn't sure what exactly those responsibilities were, but it was clear that Lyra didn't have the luxury of acting carefree like he did. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "But I still think you're pretty interesting. You're not like what I expected." That got her attention. She tilted her head slightly. "And what did you expect?" Ethan grinned, leaning in a little. "I expected you to be all about the fame, the beauty, the power, the usual stuff. But you different." Lyra didn't respond right away. Her expression softened, just a little. She didn't look as defensive as before, and that made Ethan feel like he was getting somewhere. "You don't know anything about me." "Human," she said, her tone still sharp, but less harsh than before. "You think you can just look at me and understand who I am?" Ethan stepped back slightly, realizing he might have pushed too far. "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you again." Lyra was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "The attention, the title, the expectations, I didn't choose it." Ethan was taken aback. "But you've been living this way for a long time. You're a queen. Doesn't that mean you've accepted it?" She shook her head. "It doesn't. I've accepted it. Just means I've learned how to survive it." Ethan could see the walls she had built around herself, and for the first time, he understood that there was much more to Lyra than the beauty queen image. She wasn't just some untouchable figure. She was a person with fears, doubts, and struggles, just like anyone else. "I didn't know," he said softly. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment they both just stood there, the noise of the marketplace fading into the background. Ethan could see the vulnerability in her eyes, something she never showed anyone else. It made him want to protect her, to show her that she didn't have to be alone. But Lyra quickly pulled away, the mask returning to her face. "Enough talking, human. Not interested in your pity," Ethan nodded, feeling like he had pushed his luck enough for one day. "All right, I'll go, but maybe next time we can have a real conversation." Lyra's lips curled slightly into a small smile. "Maybe." As he turned to leave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He didn't know what it was, but he was certain that this wasn't the last time he'd see Lyra. Ethan didn't expect to see Lyra again so soon. After their encounter at the marketplace, he assumed their paths wouldn't cross again. But a few days later, things took a turn. A dangerous situation had arisen, and Ethan found himself assigned to a mission with Lyra. It started with a sudden alert. The Peacekeeping Council had received intelligence about a rogue faction of aliens, threatening to destabilize the peace on the planet. The group was known for their unpredictability and violence, and they had already caused trouble in nearby settlements. It was up to the peacekeepers to stop them. Ethan had prepared for a long day of planning and strategy. But when he received his orders, he couldn't believe it. He was being sent to help Lyra. As part of the mission, she was considered a valuable asset. Her position as a queen and public figure meant she had influence, and her participation would give the peacekeepers the support they needed at first. Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about working with her again. The last thing he wanted was to get caught up in another situation where things went wrong between them. But the peacekeepers didn't give him a choice. He was going, and Lyra was going with him. The meeting took place in a large command center. The room was filled with maps, charts, and various communication devices, all set up to plan their strategy. Ethan arrived early and found himself waiting at a table, sorting through the mission details. He was trying to focus on the task ahead, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. When she walked in, his breath caught for a moment. Lyra was as confident as ever, walking with purpose, her eyes scanning the room. She was flanked by a few guards, but she didn't look at all nervous. She was here to do what she had to do, and that was it. Ethan stood up as she approached. He wasn't sure how to greet her, but he simply said, "Lyra." She didn't immediately respond, her attention focused on the mission briefing. But after a few seconds, she glanced at him. Her expression cool, but not unkind. "Human," she replied, nodding slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "Same here, but I guess we're both in this together." Didn't seem surprised by that. In fact, she seemed almost relieved. The last time they had spoken, there had been tension between them. But now, with a real mission ahead, the atmosphere felt different. The awkwardness between them was still there, but there was also an unspoken understanding that they had bigger things to focus on. The mission was serious. Their objective was to infiltrate the rogue faction's base, gather intelligence, and neutralize any threats. But the peacekeepers had decided to send in a smaller, more mobile team to do the job quickly. That meant Lyra, as a prominent figure, would be a critical part of the operation. "We'll need your expertise." "Lyra," one of the officers said, briefing her on the details of the mission. "Your status here is important. You're the key to gaining their trust." Ethan watched her carefully, noticing the way she listened closely. Her face calm, but serious. Wasn't just the queen anymore. She was someone with a purpose, someone who understood the weight of the mission. The more Ethan saw her in this light, the more he began to respect her. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do my part." After the briefing, the team gathered for final preparations. Ethan and Lyra were assigned to work together on the front lines. There were a few other soldiers, but it was clear that they would be relying heavily on Lyra's presence and influence to gain access to the rogue faction's base as they suited up. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just another mission, it was one that could make or break the peace between the different species. Everything depended on them doing their jobs perfectly. There were no second chances. Lyra was silent as she adjusted her gear, but Ethan noticed the small frown on her face. She seemed to be lost in thought, her mind likely on the mission and the stakes that came with it. He felt the need to say something, to break the tension, but he didn't know how. He didn't want to come off as insensitive. "Hey," he said quietly. "You've done this kind of thing before, right?" Lyra looked at him for a moment, her eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Of course I have. I've had to do worse things to protect my people." Ethan nodded, understanding. He didn't know what it was like to have the entire weight of a planet on his shoulders, but he could imagine how hard it must be. "I just wanted to make sure you were ready. We need to stick together out there." Lyra's lips curved into a slight smile, but it was brief. "I'm ready, but I won't be the one who needs protecting." Ethan couldn't help but smile back. "I'm not worried about that. I think you can take care of yourself." The final preparations made, the team headed out. The journey to the rogue faction's base was tense. But the further they went, the more Ethan realized how much he was starting to trust Lyra. She was a natural leader, her presence commanding the attention of everyone around her. The way she moved through the group, making decisions, giving orders, it was impressive. He had never seen her like this before. When they finally arrived at the base, the air was thick with tension. The team spread out, each member taking their position. Ethan and Lyra were placed on the front line, just outside the compound. The plan was to make contact with one of the faction leaders and convince them to cooperate. It wasn't going to be easy. Ethan could feel his pulse racing as the countdown began. He glanced over at Lyra, who was standing tall and poised. She was ready. Whatever happened next, he knew she would be the one to lead them through it. And in that moment, Ethan realized something important. This mission wasn't just about stopping a threat. It was about working together, trusting each other, and perhaps even building something new. The mission had taken a turn. What was supposed to be a quick infiltration had turned into something much more complicated. Ethan and Lyra were no longer just on a simple mission to gather intelligence. They were in the heart of enemy territory. Facing the possibility of a loud conflict, the rogue faction's base was heavily fortified. And as soon as they attempted to make contact, things went wrong. Their first attempt to communicate was met with hostility, and the situation quickly escalated. What had been planned as a peaceful negotiation became a tense standoff. Ethan found himself in the thick of it, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't signed up for this. He was just a soldier, used to small skirmishes and standard peacekeeping duties. But now, as he crouched behind a wall with Lyra, the sound of blaster fire ringing through the air, he realized how serious things had gotten. Lyra was as calm as ever, moving swiftly and decisively. She didn't seem rattled by the gunfire or the danger. Instead, she exuded confidence, her movements controlled and efficient. It was clear she had been through this kind of thing before. "Stay low," Lyra whispered to Ethan as she peered around the corner, scanning the area. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something that told Ethan she wasn't as calm as she appeared. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his blaster. He had to trust her. She was the leader here, not him. He wasn't the one who had the power to negotiate with the enemy. She was. She was the one who knew how to get them out of this alive. He watched as Lyra moved forward, signaling for him to follow. They moved together, silently, navigating the shadows of the enemy base. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt like a calculated risk. They had no backup. If things went south, it was just the two of them against the entire faction. As they approached the central command center, Lyra held up a hand, signaling for Ethan to stop. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the room in front of them. The doors to the command center were heavily guarded. Lyra knew they couldn't just walk in and hope for the best. "This is where it gets tricky," she muttered, more to herself. "Then too, Ethan? We have to get in there without alerting them. If they catch us, it's over." Ethan felt a surge of anxiety. He didn't like this. Didn't like the idea of sneaking around, hoping they wouldn't be caught. It went against everything he had been trained to do. It wasn't about to question Lyra now. If anyone could get them through this, it was her. She turned to him, her eyes locking with his. "Stay close. Follow my lead." Ethan nodded, and they moved again, closer to the command center. Now the guards were distracted, their attention focused on the front entrance. Lyra's plan was simple: sneak in, disable the security system, and gather the information they needed. But with each step, the danger grew. They reached the control panel, and Lyra immediately got to work, her fingers moving quickly over the console. Ethan kept watch, his heart racing as he kept an eye out for any approaching guards. The silence between them was filled with the sound of Lyra's focused movements. He could tell she was trying to stay calm, but there was something else in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. He wasn't sure if it was fear or something deeper, but it made him wonder. What was Lyra really thinking? How much of this was an act, and how much was real? He had seen her as the confident, untouchable queen, but now, in this moment, she seemed different. "Almost there," Lyra whispered, her voice low but firm. Ethan nodded, his attention flicking nervously toward the entrance. The seconds felt like hours, each one stretching on. He wanted to do something, anything to help, but all he could do was wait. Then the sound of footsteps reached his ears, and his pulse spiked. He turned to Lyra, his eyes wide with panic. They weren't alone. Lyra didn't panic. Instead, she grabbed his arm, pulling him into a dark corner. They hid, holding their breath, as the guards walked past, unaware of their presence. Ethan's heart was in his throat, but he could feel Lyra's steady grip on his arm, keeping him calm. When the guards passed, Lyra finally let out a quiet breath of relief. "That was too close," she murmured, before turning back to the console. "We have to hurry." Ethan's mind raced. He had never been in a situation like this before, quiet, tense, and filled with danger. But seeing Lyra so calm, so collected, made him feel like they could actually make it out of here alive. "Got it," Lyra said, her voice sharp as the control panel blinked to life. The door to the command center slid open, and they slipped. Inside, the room was dark, filled with screens and various communication devices. Lyra quickly moved to one of the terminals, pulling up data. Ethan watched, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about stopping a rogue faction anymore. This was about protecting their people, making sure that real peace could survive in this galaxy. Lyra's eyes flicked over the data, and her expression hardened. They've been planning an attack. A full-scale assault on the peacekeepers. "We need to get this information back to headquarters." Ethan's heart dropped. This was worse than he thought. The rogue faction wasn't just a threat, they were preparing for war. He had no idea how much time they had left, but they had to act fast. Lyra quickly transmitted the data, securing it to a nearby device. "We're done here," she said, her voice now cold and focused. "Let's get out of here." As they moved back toward the exit, Ethan felt a sense of urgency. They were running out of time. The mission wasn't over yet, but at least they had what they came for. The next step was getting back to the peacekeepers and delivering the information before it was too late. But as they stepped out into the hallway, a loud noise rang out. The building shook, and Ethan's heart stopped. The enemy had found them. Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward the nearest exit. Moving with the speed and precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, they had to run. They had to make it out. Live. The sound of footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor, and Ethan's heart raced faster. The enemy was closing in. They had only moments before the base would be swarming with guards. Lyra's grip on his arm tightened as she pulled him forward, her pace steady and sure. She was focused, her eyes scanning the dark hallway ahead. They had made it out of the command center. But the escape wasn't going to be easy. The base was built like a maze, and Ethan knew they couldn't risk being caught. If they did, the mission and their lives would be over. had the data they needed. But now they had to make it back to the Peacekeeper extraction point. Lyra moved swiftly, leading the way. Ethan followed closely behind, trying to keep up. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but there was something in Lyra's calm demeanor that kept him focused. Despite the danger, he couldn't help but feel a sense of trust building. Between them, she was the one in control here, and that gave him confidence. As they turned a corner, the noise of the base grew louder. There were shouts now, distant but growing closer. The guards were searching for them, and if they weren't careful, they would be trapped. "We need to pick up the pace," Lyra whispered, her voice low but urgent. She glanced over her shoulder at Ethan, her eyes filled with determination. "Don't have much time," Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. He had never been in a situation like this before, but he knew one thing for sure. They had to keep moving. They reached a stairwell and began to climb quickly, hoping to put distance between themselves and the search party. As they reached the top, they found themselves in a small hallway that led to the outer walls of the base. The air was thick with tension, and Ethan could feel the sweat dripping down his back. "There's a way out ahead," Lyra said, her voice still steady, despite the chaos. "But we need to be quick." Ethan didn't argue, trusted her, and he knew she had been in situations like this before. She was their best chance to make it out alive. They moved toward the exit, but as they neared the door, a loud crash echoed from behind them. A group of guards had found their trail. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pulled open the door and pushed Ethan through, stepping out into the cold night air. The base was surrounded by high walls, but there was a small gate. A head barely visible in the darkness. "Go," Lyra commanded, her voice sharp with urgency. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He ran ahead, keeping his head low, following Lyra as she led the way. They reached the gate and Lyra worked quickly to disable the security system. Ethan kept watch, his pulse racing as he scanned the area for any signs of pursuit. The gate clicked open, and they slipped through into the open field beyond the base. But they couldn't relax just yet. The extraction point was still a long way off, and they had no idea how many guards were still on their trail. "Keep moving," Lyra urged, her voice barely above a whisper. They ran through the darkness, moving quickly and silently. Ethan's muscles were sore, and he could feel the exhaustion starting to set in, but he kept pushing forward. Lyra was ahead of him, her movements graceful and purposeful, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. As they reached a thick line of trees, Lyra slowed, signaling for Ethan to stop. She crouched down, peering through the foliage. They needed to be sure they weren't being followed. Ethan's breath came in short gasps, but he stayed close to her, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape. The sounds of the base had faded, but the tension in the air was still thick. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. "I think we're clear," Lyra said after a moment, her voice calm but serious. "We need to get to the extraction point before it's too late." Ethan nodded, but he was still uneasy. They had made it out of the base, but they weren't out of danger yet. They had to keep moving. They pushed through the trees, heading toward the extraction point. The night was quiet, but the threat of pursuit was always in the back of Ethan's mind. He kept his eyes on Lyra, knowing that if anyone could get them out of this, it was her. After what felt like hours of running, they finally reached the extraction point, a small hidden clearing, just outside the reach of the base's security systems. The Peacekeeper shuttle was waiting for them, its engines humming softly in the distance. Lyra was the first to approach the shuttle, her steps quick and purposeful. Ethan followed, relief flooding through him. They had made it. They were almost home. As they climbed aboard, the door closed behind them, and the shuttle began to rise into the air. Ethan collapsed into one of the seats, breathing heavily, his body aching from the long run. Lyra sat across from him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak for a moment, but Ethan could see the weight of the mission on her face. She had led them through it all, from the command center to the escape. And now, with the data secure, they had succeeded. But there was something more. Ethan had seen it in her eyes, the quiet determination, the strength she had shown when everything was falling apart. He had underestimated her before, but now he saw her for who she truly was, a leader. Someone who could handle anything that came her way. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, his voice full of respect. "You saved us." Lyra glanced at him, her lips curling into a small smile. "We saved each other." The shuttle flew into the night sky, and for the first time since the mission began, Ethan allowed himself to relax. They had made it out alive, and they had accomplished their mission. But more than that, he realized he had come to respect Lyra in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a queen, she was a warrior, and he was grateful to have her by his side. The journey back to the Peacekeeper headquarters was long, but it gave Ethan time to reflect on everything that had happened. The mission had been far more dangerous than he had expected, but they had made it through together. Couldn't shake the feeling of admiration he had for Lyra. She was a leader, someone who knew how to stay calm in the most chaotic situations. And as the shuttle flew through the stars, Ethan realized something important. He had never truly understood who she was until now. The shuttle glided through the quiet night sky, the stars twinkling in the distance. Ethan sat quietly across from Lyra, who had her eyes closed, her head resting against the seat. She looked exhausted, but there was something about her that remained strong. Even now, after everything they had been through, she carried herself with the same poise and confidence that had made her a legend. As the shuttle approached the Peacekeeper base, Ethan could see the lights of the complex below. The mission was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. They had the data they needed, and now it was time for the Peacekeepers to act. But for Ethan, the most important thing was that they had made it out alive. "We're almost there," Lyra said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but steady, as always. "You did well, Ethan. I didn't expect you to handle the pressure so well." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her compliment. "I didn't think I had much choice. You were the one leading the way. I just followed." "Okay." Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's the thing, though. You didn't just follow. You stood by me when it mattered. You kept calm. That's not something many people can do." Ethan shifted in his seat, not sure how to respond. He wasn't used to praise, especially from someone like Lyra. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I guess I just trusted you. You knew what you were doing, and I just tried to keep up." Lyra nodded, her gaze distant. "That's why I chose you. For this mission, I knew you had potential. You're not just some soldier following orders. You think for yourself, and that's what matters." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. Lyra had always seemed so far out of reach, a figure of power and grace. To hear her speak to him like this, with such respect, left him speechless. The shuttle touched down on the landing pad, and the door opened. A few Peacekeeper officers were waiting for them, ready to take the data and begin their next steps. Ethan stood and followed Lyra out of the shuttle, feeling the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. The danger was over, but now came the task of dealing with the aftermath. As they walked toward the headquarters, Ethan glanced over at Lyra. She seemed different now, more relaxed than she had been during the mission. But there was still something about her that he couldn't quite understand. She had been through so much, and yet she carried it all with such strength. He couldn't help but wonder how much of it was a front, how much she kept hidden from everyone. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. Lyra looked at him, a little surprised by the question. "I'm fine," she said, though there was a hint of weariness in her voice. "It's been a long day, but we got through it. That's what matters." They reached the command center, where the Peacekeepers were already working on analyzing the data they had retrieved. Lyra handed the information over to one of the officers, who immediately began transferring it to their systems. "Is it enough?" one of the officers asked, glancing at the screen. Lyra nodded. "It's enough to stop their plans. They won't be able to launch the attack. Not now." Ethan watched as Lyra worked with the officers, her focus unwavering. She was in her element. Now, taking charge and ensuring everything was in place. She wasn't just a queen, she was a warrior, and that was something he hadn't fully understood until now. As the officers continued their work, Lyra turned to Ethan, her expression softening. "No, this mission wasn't easy for you," she said. It wasn't easy for any of us. But you did well. You're a valuable ally. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest at her words. He had come to this planet thinking he would just do his job and go home. But he had learned something far more important. He had learned to see the person behind the title. Lyra wasn't just a beauty queen or a leader, she was someone who cared deeply about her people, someone who was willing to sacrifice everything to protect them. And Ethan respected her more than he had ever respected anyone. Thank you, he said quietly. I couldn't have done it without you. Lyra gave him a small smile, and for a moment there was no tension between them. No walls, just two people who had been through something together, who had shared an experience that had changed them both. I think we make a good team, Lyra said, her voice light but sincere. Ethan nodded, letting a sense of pride well up. Inside him, yeah, I think we do. As they stood there, surrounded by the hum of activity in the command center, Ethan realized that the mission had changed him. He had gone into it thinking it was just another job, but it had turned into something much more. It had been a test not just of his skills, but of his character. He had passed. The peacekeepers had won this battle, but it was clear that the war wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead. But for now, Ethan knew one thing. He had Lyra by his side, and that made all the difference.